Hello. Hi there. My name is Sophie Hilaire, and I am an MBA admissions counselor at Stratus, also a Wharton MBA, and I'm really excited to talk to you all today about the best ways to research MBA programs. This is something that comes up a lot with my clients when they're trying to figure out how do I figure out which schools I should go to? How do I figure out a nice spread of safety schools, target schools, and reach schools, and just good fits for what they're interested in pursuing post MBA? So, what I'm going to do today is walk you through this chart here that Stratus partnered with Forte to create. And afterwards, we will do a Q&A and we can cover any of the questions that you have about anything that I mentioned here, but really we can just talk about anything. I'm an MBA admissions counselor and I deal with everything with my clients pretty much year round. So feel free to just shoot any questions my way. I will be watching the Q&A on the right-hand side and the chat as well. So feel free to drop questions or any other comments that you have as we move along. So when you're thinking about which MBA program might be good for you, first you just want to start with your career goals. Um, and that would be both your short-term career goals and your long-term career goals. The short-term one, I would say, is actually more important for a lot of programs because reason being, they wanna know that you have a plan to get yourself employed once you graduate. Probably while you're researching schools, you're noticing the stats of what percentage of students are employed X number of weeks after graduating. And that's a stat that schools really like to protect and keep nice and high and close to as 100% as they can. So it's good to be really clear on what you want to do in the short term. And then there's other programs, though, that are more interested in what you want to do long term because they figure, okay, they just want to know the direction you're going in. And they understand that probably once you get to business school, there's a good chance you will not be doing what you wrote your essays about just because right now you don't know what you don't know. And I know for me personally, I was in the army before I went to business school, went to Wharton, and there was so much about the business world that I had no idea about. So there's a lot of discovery that happens at business school, and that's a good thing. But when you're starting your research for MBA programs, you should at least have, a narrative on what you want to do in the short term and long term. From there, you can start evaluating which schools make sense. Reason being, if you want to go into consulting, let's say, that's what I did. I went to McKinsey after business school for 5 years. You're probably going to want to target programs that have a great track record of success in consulting. Um, you wouldn't want to necessarily go to a school that isn't very well known for placing folks in that. So once you're clear on that, it's time to start looking at what we like to call the 5 C's. So the 5 C's are what you see here in red: curriculum, clubs, community and culture, competitiveness, and cost. So let's start with the first one, curriculum. So there's several ways you can evaluate whether their curriculum is going to make sense for you. You can look at, everything that's listed here, but I think a good place to start is actually their core curriculum and seeing how structured versus how flexible it is. A school like Booth is going to be super duper flexible. A school like Wharton is going to have everyone in your learning team pretty much in the same classes for your whole first semester. So you can also see how they've shaped that, what types of electives they have that might interest you. I mean, there's I will admit, I think it's a little messy on these schools' websites sometimes to just find out like what the full catalog of courses is, because they're not all structured the exact same. I mean, every school kind of does it their own way. But from talking to current students and alumni, you can also get a good sense of what classes you might be able to do, especially if you're connecting with alumni that are in the field that you want to go into for either your short term or long term goal. So you can look at other classes that they have there. It doesn't need to just be classes in, as part of like the things you're tracking towards your GPA on. It could just be like a lecture series or experiential learning opportunities. One of those things like that I did when I was at Wharton was the Venture Fellows program, and I got to go to Antarctica for a week. It was pretty awesome, but that would be, it's not a vacation; it's actually a leadership experiential learning experience. So things like that, see if, there's something like that that would pop out and make you really, really, really want to attend that program. Centers and institutes as well. And just know that a lot of times those go beyond just the MBA program and maybe even include undergrads or other grad schools at the university. There's some business schools that are attached to universities that have big names and a lot of great resources in other programs that you may want to go explore and do a little bit of this and a little bit of that while you're there. I mean, I took some language classes actually with undergrads while I was at business school. So, a lot to consider for curriculum. Then next up is clubs. So there's a few different types of clubs. The first would be professional, and that could be something like the consulting club, the PEVC club, things like the marketing club, things like that. And that would make a lot of sense if that's maybe in your short term goal or your long term goal. There's affinity clubs. It could be women in business, could be Asians in business, African Americans. There's so many different affinity clubs at every single school. So you may find that, especially if those clubs are very tight knit and really support one another and the alumni in getting jobs afterwards, that could be a really great choice for a school. Um, then there's also interests. So, I mean, here it says soccer, but there's so many different sports you could do. I know at Wharton, hockey's a big deal. And for a lot of people, that's a stretch experience that they've never done. Like it's usually someone who played, one person who played hockey, maybe in high school or college, is the team captain, and everyone else is just kind of learning as they go, but having a lot of fun and traveling to compete against other business schools and getting some social time in there, along with some exercise. There's certainly other sports you can do, rugby, basketball. But there's also other interests like maybe the food club, the wine club. I was co-president of our Scotch and whiskey club back in the day. So a lot of different things to, whether you're interested in it already and it's a passion of yours, or it's something that you're really excited to explore and try out now that you're going to have this 2 years, 1 to 2 years of just having a very different lifestyle than probably what you're doing right now while you're watching this webinar. I mean, maybe you just finished work and, life is really busy and there's quite a bit of a grind. Business school is going to be a little bit different. Hardest thing I would say about business school is recruiting. The rest of it is really what you want to make of it, which is really nice. Then third would be community slash culture. So we group these together. First up here, it says collaborative versus competitive. Now, different programs, you're going to get a flavor of this by talking to current students. Also, maybe getting some non-biased advice, maybe anonymously on Reddit or something. Of course, GMAT Club, you can explore these forums and talk to one another and find out, what the vibe is at each of these programs. But certain ones are going to be very collaborative, and others will be competitive. But the nice thing is, there's grade non-disclosure at a lot of top programs, which means that your grades actually don't matter as long as you pass your classes. So your recruiters are not allowed to legally ask you what your GPA is. If you have a really great GPA and you just want to tell them, that's okay, but they're not allowed to ask. So yeah, that collaborative versus competitive nature is going to be really different for different people. Some people really love the competitive aspect. So not me personally, but those people are out there. Um, then city versus rural. So what kind of experience do you want for your time at business school? And maybe if you're trying to get placed in a certain region for a job afterwards, that's another thing to consider. So, it's a really big difference between going to a place like Columbia Business School in New York City versus a place like Tuck that is really out in the woods, in the kind of in the middle of nowhere. So consider what you might actually want for that experience, because those two will differ greatly. There's also obviously medium-sized cities in the middle there. So then there's also large versus small programs. Some people are really excited about going to a huge program where they're going to have a lot of different folks to network with and a big, alumni network afterwards. I would say Wharton is maybe one of those classes, closer to 1,000 students graduating each year. But then there's really tight knit communities and classes, more like a Yale or a Tuck. And that size program works better for a lot of people. one thing you'll hear about, I feel like when people ask, "What's like one thing you regret now that you're done with your MBA?" And one of the very common answers is not getting to know more of my classmates. Um, and that can be really tough if you have a massive class. Um, so consider that, how close do you want to be with all of your classmates by the time you graduate versus, maybe just carving out your little niche within a big class. And then the last thing here on this column is khakis versus cutoffs. Honestly, I don't know anyone who wears khakis anymore, but, it's more just like, is it gonna be more formal place like HBS, or is it gonna be a little more casual and laid back, maybe like a UCLA Anderson? So consider, how do you like how are you comfortable? How do you like dressing up? Different people will enjoy different aspects of, just the vibe of how serious something feels, and that's all just part of the culture. Next is competitiveness. So you're going to want to look at the class profile, which every business school publishes every year on their website, and take a look at, the stats across the board. What was the median GMAT, GRE, or GPA? What percentage of the class was women? Maybe if you're a woman like me and Asian, like what percentage of class is Asian? What percentage international? Get a sense for, how likely it is that you would get a seat in that class. There's also, the fact that you're going to want to see. Sometimes it's nice to be, applying to a program that is super duper aligned with your interests. Like really excited about finance. Chicago Booth and I would say Wharton are probably on your list if you're looking at that tier of program. Um, but sometimes it's nice to be a big fish in a small pond. Like maybe you're really excited about finance, but you end up at Yale. You're probably gonna, not have as many people to compete against for the internships that you want and be able to stand out more. So also when you're applying, you will be standing out more because you have a different kind of background. So all of those things are things to consider about how competitive you are going to be for the program, not, how competitive the program is with one another. And finally, the cost. So when you look at the stats in the class profile and you look at your own stats, consider, you know, is there a chance that you might get some scholarship money? I see it all the time. I have a lot of clients get 100% scholarships. Sometimes they take it, sometimes they don't. But yeah, that will help massively because this is obviously a very expensive endeavor. Look at the class profile also. There's also affinity scholarships sometimes, there's merit-based scholarships, there's need-based scholarships, a lot of things to explore, whether you are international or a domestic applicant. And yeah, also the timing. All of these are important. And the timing, sorry, I will give a little more detail on that. Sometimes, depending on the round that you're applying, you are going to have a better chance at scholarships. So do a little research on each program and when they release that so that you can make sure if that's something that's important to you, that you're setting yourself up for at least a shot. At the bottom here, there are just a few ways listed of how you can go about this research. First is online. So obviously, you know how to Google, you know how to go on the school's websites. I personally think when you go on a school's website, a lot of these MBA programs sound the same. They're using a lot of the same buzzwords. They're, leadership, teamwork, blah, blah, blah. Um, how you're really going to get into the nitty gritty of what separates these schools is, I would say, one, it helps to go visit on campus. You could also, if you're just online, you could go. We actually at Stratus, we have these guides. They're free. Anyone can go on our website and download them. And they distill into just a couple of pages, like the real things that stand out about each MBA program. And a lot of times, those are the buzzwords that you want to make sure you're dropping into your essays. Like, for example, if you're writing a Wharton essay and you're not talking about being collaborative or anything around data driven analysis, you may not be setting yourself up to look like a good fit for the school. But also online, obviously, GMAT Club is an amazing resource. All these other forums you can find. And yeah, so there's a plethora of resources online to evaluate these schools. You can also attend webinars and events. In person would be ideal because that's also going to not only give you a better flavor of the personalities that come from the program, and if you feel like you would jive well there. But also, you may end up meeting someone at an event who ends up becoming an unofficial advocate for you on the other side. Maybe they're from admissions, or maybe they're a student that is just going to pass along a good word for you. So it's always nice to go to these events. And even though they're technically non evaluative, I would always act like they are. But there I know a lot of folks can't go travel to events in person. Maybe you're international and maybe there aren't events that are being hosted near you. Or maybe you just are so busy that you're not able to take the time to go fly to these different business schools and check them out in person. In that case, definitely check out the webinars. They put a lot of time and thought into, how they're getting the word out through these webinars. I will say, if you're going to sign up for a webinar, make sure you go because it's just too easy for schools at this point. They all have, systems to track, how if you actually showed up after you signed up. So yeah, and you don't have to do 100 webinars. Like 2 to 3, for each school, I think is a great number. Honestly, that's even aspirational for some people, but that wouldn't be overdoing it, and you would probably get a nice spread of information if you weren't able to go in person. And finally, conversations with current students and alumni. So, this is going to give you a lot of direct insight into exactly whatever your burning questions are about the program, which is really nice. And it's going to give you a personal touch and feel about what what type of people this school attracts, and the types of people that would be your peers and the type of people that would be in your alumni network afterwards. Because that's a huge part of going to business school. Business school is very short, 1 to 2 years, but the alumni network lasts for the rest of your life, professional career, even personal stuff. People make a lot of good friends at school. I still have some of my best friends from school, and I graduated, almost 10 years ago. So that's oh, sorry, one other thing I'll say about that is, if you're wondering, how do I access these current students and alumni? I don't work with anyone who went there. I think a good place to start is going on the website, researching one of those affinity groups that we just talked about, or those interest clubs or professional clubs, and find whoever leads the talking outreach to prospective candidates, or just the president club, whoever the POCs are. Reach out to them and say, hey, I'm interested in this program. I'd love to be a part of this club as well. Is there someone I could talk to? Just do like a 30-minute Zoom call. And they've got a whole system in place for how they connect folks to prospective candidates. So that way you're going to be able to talk to someone who's a current student there. As far as alumni, if you don't know anyone personally, maybe you know someone who knows someone who could connect you. And then last resort, I would say, is LinkedIn. I know clients who have just cold messaged plenty of people on LinkedIn, and it's a bit of a numbers game. You send out a lot of requests and see who responds. But hopefully you get someone, and I have seen it happen a lot, which is awesome. I'm always so like impressed when alumni take the time just off a cold LinkedIn message to actually just connect with someone. But yeah, they're able to get from that a lot of great quotes and insight that they can use in their essays too. So it's not just about figuring out, spending this research time to figure out which schools apply to. You can use the information that you've collected along the way to bolster your application, whether it's through fodder for your essays, or relationships that you built with admissions and things along the way. So that wraps up my presentation here. Let me take a look at the Q&A and see what you guys would like to know more about. And we will do Q&A for about the next 25 minutes. So I'll go with this first one. Do the AdCom prefer to admit younger, lesser experienced applicants because they are able to cope with longer work hours and lesser responsibilities? How does committee determine the quality of paid work experience and pro bono? Okay, I think this is a few questions. So to break it apart and do the first one, do AdComs prefer to admit younger, less experienced applicants because they're able to cope with longer work hours? Uh, okay, here's the thing about work experience. The median number of work experience years is 3 to 8. So right in the middle would be about 5 years of work experience. If you're applying with less than 3 years of work experience, it's gonna be a harder sell because you don't have as much, experience that you've earned out there in the world, that's going to make you an asset to the classroom discussions, when you're when you're sharing, personal insights. That's what really makes, you know, MBA programs so great is when you're in the classroom, people are raising their hand and talking about something that they, saw in their professional career before. So if you don't have enough of that, it's just going to be harder to get into school for that reason. So I wouldn't say they want the youngest, least experienced applicants. Um, and the work hours and responsibilities, I mean, it's a bit different. Like business school doesn't really think about that. That's more of like probably what an employer might consider. And I do think that's probably true. The younger you are, you probably don't have a family, let's say, and a bunch of other responsibilities going on, and you can totally devote yourself to work. I mean, I know that's what I did in my 20s. I completely poured myself into my work. Um, so that's part of just kind of paying your dues as a professional, in a lot of career paths, but I don't think it really has much to do with the AdCom thoughts. I would say that's more like 3 to 8 years. And oh, and sorry, if you're over 8 years, it's probably time to maybe consider an executive MBA if you're still wanting an MBA, just because at that point you've actually got too much experience and you might not even really benefit from the discussions in class because you're sitting there with people who are at a very different point in their career. And at that point, it just makes sense for you to go be with a peer group in an executive MBA program. How does the committee determine the quality of paid work experience and pro bono community service? Well, I would say they're going to look at, you know, the as far as your work experience, I mean, they're going to look at your resume and see what company you worked for. Having a nice brand on there is always a good thing, but it doesn't have to be. I've seen plenty of people with boutique kind of experience get into top schools, and often that's because of the way that they communicated through their essays. And the pro bono community service is something that hopefully everyone who's listening here has some aspect of something that they're doing beyond just what they're getting paid to do. Maybe that's, community service, but it could also be some additional duties that you have at work. Maybe you're leading an affinity club at work. Um, and depending on how involved you are with that, you know, explain it, the number of hours you dedicate to it, exactly what you're doing, what the impact has been that you have created in your time there. All of that I like to have my clients make very clear on their resume. And if it's something that's really connected to their overall story, then that's something that I would also include in their essays to bring that to life a bit more. All right. So hopefully that answered your question. The next one, do qualitative factors such as emotional quotient and orator skills provide a strong case for an admit to B school vis-a-vis quantitative factors such as standardized tests, GPA, less than essay prompts and work experience? So both are very important. And even when you look at these standardized tests, GRE, GMAT, EA, is um, of their ethos once you get to school. So I would say it's definitely both. Different people are going to be stronger at different things, which is totally okay. It's good to try to get yourself at least to a pretty good level on both sides of the equation, and then if you've got a spike, perhaps in verbal or more qualitative stuff versus quantitative, that's okay, and the other way around. I mean, the adcoms are not building a class of like a bunch of people that are perfectly well rounded. They're building a very diverse class of people with all different skills and gifts. So you don't need to be amazing at everything, but what you are good at, you really want to highlight to show that that's going to kind of be the flavor that you're going to share once you get there on campus. So hopefully that answered that. Um, for an international, maybe I think, will there be any difference considering the candidate will be taking a loan? Um, I'm not sure what this question means. Let's see. I maybe if you could follow up and kind of give a little more detail, that'd be great. But maybe you were talking about the cost column that I mentioned and uh, how that might work out for an international student. But that's not it's going that again is going to be different for everyone's financial situation, whether you're taking out a loan, whether you are sponsored by your company, whether you get scholarship funding and are able to go to school that way. So there's a lot of ways to do that. And yeah, hopefully everyone's able to figure out a way to pay for business school, because I know it is such a massive, massive financial commitment. All right. This next question, generally speaking, round three admission acceptances decreased by 50%. Is this assumption true? Furthermore, not requiring funding from university, does that help chances of admission? So, let's talk about this in two parts. The first one, yeah, round three is not a very popular time to apply. Between round one and round two, that's when you're going to see roughly the same number of applicants, actually. So, when people say, should I apply in round one, round two, or round three? I always say apply when you have the best application ready to go, but probably not round three unless you are unless you like were just waiting to get this GMAT score or something, and then you absolutely crush it and you were blown away, and now you're sending off your application. Round three is, well, sorry, and the difference, just to go back to round one and round two, is that obviously by round two, some of the seats are already filled. So if someone applied already and was accepted, maybe multiple people who have a similar profile to you, that's gonna weaken your chances of getting in because, they don't need a million of you. So making, showing how you're gonna stand out regardless is very important for that reason. But also, if you can apply in round one, you're just gonna set yourself up the best chance of success. And when you're waiting to hear for interview invites or if you were admitted, you won't have to have that nagging feeling in the back of your mind of, did I really give it, my best? Did I really set myself up in the best way, given the timing of my application? Could I, have applied earlier? But again, if you're not ready in round one, absolutely do not apply in round one because they admit pretty much the same number of people in round two. Round three, though, very different. I almost never recommend that anyone applies there unless, it's a really specific case. By the time they get to round three, they're also reevaluating their wait list folks and going back there, and they got plenty of qualified people who have already been applying. So it's not like they're just sitting around twiddling their thumbs with a bunch of empty seats. They've got a roster of qualified folks. I mean, all these MBA programs have more qualified people applying than they do have seats in the class. Um, the way to get around that is just to apply to a lot of programs, I think, to help increase your odds. But yeah, round three is tough. And furthermore, not requiring funding from university, does that help chances of admission? Yeah, I would say it, when you're if you're talking about needing scholarship money, when you send your application in, you're just saying like, "Will you admit me?" And from there, they can decide yes or no, and are they going to give you scholarship funding in some way or not? So if oftentimes there's not even really an ask for that. Sometimes there are um, different scholarships that you can apply for, like Darden has the Batten Scholars program, and you send that in when you send in your application. But I don't think that hurts your chances of getting in at all, asking for that as part of your application. But I would say it's probably easier for you to go to school if you don't need the funding. So hopefully that answered that question. What makes for a successful admit to top tier USB schools? Is it only the essay prompt, CV, GMAT, GRE, and GPA, or is there a defined value add, if any, factor that a candidate likely offers to MBA cohort that is preempted by graduate adcoms? So it really is this very holistic view of your profile. Part of it is going to be your academic bucket. That's going to be what you just mentioned here, your test scores and your GPA. Now, if you have, the GPA was obviously years ago, test score probably was a little more recent. If you didn't have the best GPA, a lot of top programs, it's the median GPA is like 3.5 and above. So if you're below that, you're gonna really wanna crush the GMAT or GRE in order to offset that, so that you can still have a good academic bucket. Your academic bucket can also include other, courses you've taken outside of undergrad, or maybe you got another grad school degree or something like that. So all of that they will look at and see, what kind of student are you gonna be? Are you gonna be able to handle the curriculum here, or are you gonna fail out is really all they're trying to figure out there. The essays are how you're really going to differentiate yourself, because within there, that's where your story is. I mean, this is actually the thing that I work on the most with my clients, is how to craft their personal narrative. I mean, all of you guys have lived your lives, and I'm sure you think you know yourself the best and probably know what you want to say in your essays. But sometimes it's actually really hard, because you haven't thought in in the sense of like the way that adcoms think, of how to stitch together what elements from your past to stitch together with, where you're currently at and where you want to go moving forward, those short-term and long-term goals I mentioned before, and how to connect all of those dots so that it looks very clear, and that they can see, that you have a clear vision of where you're headed, and that everything you've done leading up until now is going to help you get there, and how you're going to leverage that MBA program to make that a reality. So the essays are going to be, how you show the schools that you are a perfect fit, which is going to come from you doing a lot of introspection on all the amazing stuff about you, doing a lot of research on what makes all these schools so great, and then connecting the two in your outlines before you write your essays, so that yeah, so that you can connect those dots for them and show them, see, I'm the perfect fit. Then let's see, the CV, yeah, I mean, that's another thing that you can't really change at this point. I mean, you can definitely change how you write your resume. When I work with clients, we always start with their current resume. Some people only need a little bit of work to get it ready for an MBA program. Some people need a lot of work, and some people don't even have one, so we have to make one. Um, but when we're putting that together, there's a specific way to put it together for an MBA application, so that it actually makes sense for what you're wanting to do, and so that you will be able to impress them with, different things that you have on there. A mistake that I often see on those CVs is people will not really talk about the impact. They just kind of list out a job description, like what you would have found on LinkedIn if someone was saying like, "Hey, these are the things, the requirements for this job." But they don't really talk about what actions they took while they were there, and how that made the organization better than if they weren't there. So it's nice to see numbers, like whether that's in dollar signs, or number of people you're supervising, or number of projects you got off the ground, or different things like that. Um, Percentages too, increases, things that or decreases. Sometimes that's a good thing too. So definitely, there's ways to make your CV stand out, even though you've already done all the work in your life. Yeah, so beyond that, there's obviously, I think one thing missing from this list here is also the extracurriculars and leadership experience beyond what you've been doing just at work. So a lot of times that can be a good part of your story, because often what people are giving their personal time to outside of work is, I feel like it's usually connected more to service, and a lot of times it's also connected to what their deep desire for what they actually want to do in life, which is often more closely related to the long term goal. So that's a good data point to show them on your resume, and maybe in your essays and your interviews, to bring that to life, to explain why you are passionate about that, and why you give so much time to that outside of work. All right. How does USB school committee define culture fit for their holistic admissions process in admitting or rejecting the candidate? So they're going to get that from a couple things, or actually just your application as a whole definitely is going to give off um, a personal brand. So that's how you should be thinking about it. That's what we do here at Stratus, is help people craft what that is. It might be the first time you've even thought of that. But that is what you're putting together. It's, the amalgamation of everything that you've done. And, if the admissions committee is sitting there with a stack of applications, and they're trying to figure out how to sort these out, how would they categorize you? What type of person are you going to be? What type of flavor are you going to bring to this program? So I think part of it is, there's no like what I mentioned before, collaborative versus competitive, or, khakis versus cutoffs. These are going to be things that are probably going to come through in your essays, in your resume, and definitely when you get to the interview. So, in the interview stage, people are going to be able to tell, are you more laid back and relaxed? Are you excited about the same things that the students are excited about? Would you be the type of person that would be very active on campus? Um, your MBA time is so social. It's actually, like, a very serious part of the experience. The schools don't wanna admit a bunch of shy people who stay in their rooms all day and don't interact with one another. They wanna bring a group of people together that are not only going to be excited to hang out together, but also become lifelong friends, plan awesome vacations while you're there and beyond. And the reason they care about that is because the better time you have and the more friends you make, probably the more you're going to help each other out as alumni and the more involved you'll be with the program after graduation. So, those types of organic, you know, moments at school where people are just having fun and being social are very important. They're evaluating whether or not you would be a good fit for kind of what the norm is there. So, I would say that's going to come through a lot during your interview. So, be sure to just be authentic during that time because honestly, what good does it do you to get into a program where you don't even realize you wouldn't be a great culture fit, and then you're miserable for 1 to 2 years. Although I really don't know anyone who's ever been miserable at their MBA program. It is so much fun, that phase of life. But yeah, definitely just be authentic, and that's gonna help, connect you to and magnetize you to the programs that would be a great fit for you. Next question. I understand that every school has a different profile and different essays, but with a solid base, what is the sweet spot in number of different applications to maximize the chance of getting in? Great question. So, what is not a great method is like I worked with someone, who was like Stanford or bust. I was like, okay, well, that's a reach school for anyone. They definitely get more qualified applicants than they have seats in the class, just like any other school. So if you want to go to an MBA program, like you have to first ask yourself this question: do I have to go to an MBA program in the fall? Or do I only want to go to certain schools? And if I don't get into these schools, it's not worth the money, the time off. I got other things I can do, or I'll reapply next year. Once you get clear on that, it's help then you can figure out how to, figure out which schools to apply to. So, if you really only wanna go to 2 schools and, you're just like, "Ugh, well, I guess I should just apply to 5 just to get admitted to certain places," but you deep down know you wouldn't actually go to any of those other programs, don't apply to them. That's so much work for you, it's work for them. It's just a waste of time. So that type of person might only be applying to 2 schools because those are the only 2 schools they wanna go to, or they have a backup plan. But for most people who are just like, I just want to, I'm ready to do this pivot. I recognize that a lot of different programs could get me to where I want to be. How can I maximize my chances of just ending up at school? I think 5 is a good number, 5 to 6. Um, any more than that, it's a lot of work. So it just really depends on how much capacity you have. How busy are you at work? Which schools are you applying to? Because certain essays will help you write other essays. So when I work with clients on like 5 schools, let's say, and we're getting to the outline phase, I will tell them what order we are writing these outlines and essays in because, for example, if you start with Wharton, which their essay questions are, what are you going to take from this MBA and what are you going to contribute? Okay, that is very like the foundation of what a lot of other schools are going to ask you. So if you can get clear on that in, Wharton's word count, that's going to be material that you're going to be able to recycle for other schools while just swapping out, the names of those clubs or that major or whatever it is at the other program. So, yeah, I would say 5 is probably a good number. Within that 5, you could do 1 or 2 reaches, 1 or 2 targets, and 1 or 2 safety schools. So, and the way to evaluate which programs could fall in each of those categories for you is mostly going to be around the stats when you go to their stats from last year. How much embellishment is too much embellishment or borderline untrue? How does AdCom verify the claims you make in your essays and CV? Thank you. So, you really don't want to lie in these applications because um, once you get admitted to school, okay, so no one's going to follow up with your boss or anything while you're applying to school. But once you're admitted, every school does a background check. They can contact people who you've worked with before. I've heard of it happening, but it's not really common. For the most part, they're just going to make sure you actually graduated from that program and different things like that. Because every once in a while, there is like someone who just, I'll just go on a slight tangent. There was someone at Yale school of management who was just like sitting in on classes, going to all the parties, and everyone actually thought they were a student in the class, but they weren't. They didn't actually go through and like get admitted or anything. It's a little bit different from this question, but the schools are trying to weed out people who are embellishing things. And I would say just be honest. Be honest when you're writing these. Um, if if ask yourself this question too: if the adcom were to call up your boss and ask the question about whatever you put on your resume, would they be like, "What the heck?" Or would they be like, yeah, that's true. I mean, you're probably gonna wanna go with more of the, "Yeah, that's true." So, hopefully that answers that. Realistically speaking, how many apps can one do in a month based off your experience? Ha! Well, I'm currently working with someone who um, is quite the procrastinator, and it's kind of amazing though that in short stints of time he's able to get his materials up. With us working together on it, up to the level where I would say yes, this is good enough to submit. You don't have to wait till the next round. So it really depends on the person and what's going on at work. Um, so let's the process to filling out an essay and getting your recommenders prepped and getting your resume done. The resume, once you got that done, that's rinse and repeat for every single school. But the essays, and just getting your recommenders actually, that's a little bit more, that's also a bit of rinse and repeat, depending on how tactical you have to get with those recommendations. I know everyone's recommenders are a little bit different. Some recommenders don't even want you to send them any material. They're like, nope, I got it. Some recommenders are on the way other end of the spectrum and they say like, I don't have time for this. Help me out. And then there's people in the middle who are like, yeah, can you just send me like some rough notes or, things that would be great to highlight that help, you know, make it so I'm echoing things that you're saying in your essays so that we're not all talking about different stuff here. So that's a bit of work. And then the essays, I think, take the longest, as they should. You should put a lot of time and thought into these. I've been seeing more and more folks trying to just slap together things off ChatGPT. And it is so obvious. These essays have like no heart. It just sounds like a robot wrote them. And there's nothing personal in there. So there's really no, you of course like use ChatGPT for plenty of things, like to figure out, how could I put this narrative together a little bit better? Or how can I make this 500 word count essay down to 300, and then see what it comes up with. I mean, it's a tool. Definitely, I would say leverage it in ways that help you, but don't try to take other kinds of shortcuts or just try to do everything the night before it's due. Another aspect of the application I didn't even mention that always takes time and kind of trips people up, if you're on a 1 month deadline, is the actual portal where you're going to have to go in there and ask a whole bunch or answer all the little questions about, all right, and this many characters talk about the activities that you did and leadership things that you did in undergrad. And fill out these other questions that we have short answers and things like that that sometimes catch people by surprise because they don't see it till they're the night before and just try to get this thing submitted. So yeah, if I were to give you a number, a range could be one school in a month. Um, that, for some people even might be really hard depending on how much they're working and how much time they have on the weekend. But the most you could do in a month, well, just to tell you a little bit about me, when I was at McKinsey after I graduated from Wharton, I I decided I wanted to climb Everest. So, um, and I knew that would be really hard, but I knew that it was possible. And so, yeah, I was working McKinsey hours and I was training for Everest. And then I went and climbed the mountain and came back to work. So anything's possible. I mean, if someone was really crazy and wanted to do 20 applications, there's probably someone out there who could do it, but they're probably taking that month of vacation off of work. So, that wraps up my presentation. Thank you all so much for the great questions. If any of you would like to connect with any of the counselors at Stratus for a free consultation, I just dropped the link into the chat. I mean, I'm happy to connect with any of you for 30 minutes to answer any questions about your profile or any of your questions about B School. Certainly, if you have any personal things you want to chat about, and hopefully just to be of service to you all. So, thanks so much again for coming and have a wonderful night and good luck with all of your applications.